My name is Myra. I'm 63 years old, and I'm sitting in my small kitchen looking at family photos that used to bring me joy. For the past 2 years, my own children have treated me like I'm nothing more than a burden, a poor widow they have to tolerate. They shower my new husband, Walter, with praise and gifts while barely acknowledging my existence. What they don't know is that I've been keeping the biggest secret of my life. A secret worth $45 million that could change everything. But sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who deserve your trust the least. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button, because this story will show you that sometimes the most painful betrayals come from the people closest to your heart. I never imagined my life would turn out this way. 5 years ago, I lost my beloved husband, Frank, to cancer. He was my world, my rock, the man who built an empire in real estate, while never forgetting to bring me flowers every Friday. We had 2 children together, Jason, now 35, who works as a banker, but never seems to succeed at anything, and Kimberly, 32, a real estate agent who struggles to close deals and blames everyone but herself. Frank's death left me devastated, but what he left behind was something I never expected. Through his brilliant investments and careful planning, he had built a trust fund worth $45 million. The day before he passed, Frank called his lawyer, Robert Martinez, to my bedside. "Myra," Frank whispered, his voice weak but determined, "this money is yours. But promise me something. Use it wisely. Protect yourself first. Don't let anyone take advantage of your generous heart." I kept that promise perhaps too well. For 5 years, I lived modestly on a small monthly allowance from the trust, working part-time at the local library, driving my old Honda, and living in our simple 2-bedroom apartment. I told no one about the money, not even my children. I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing. 2 years ago, I met Walter at a grief support group. He was 58, charming, well-dressed, and seemed to understand my pain. He had lost his wife 3 years earlier and spoke beautifully about starting over. When he asked me to marry him after 6 months of dating, I said yes. I thought I was getting a companion for my golden years. I had no idea I was inviting a wolf into my home. Walter moved into my apartment and immediately made himself comfortable. He was between jobs, he explained, but actively looking for the right opportunity. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And Walter's job search seemed to consist mainly of golf games with his buddies and long lunches at expensive restaurants. When I asked about his progress, he'd smile and say, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Something perfect will come along soon." What happened next broke my heart. My children, Jason and Kimberly, who had barely visited me during my 5 years of widowhood, suddenly became frequent guests. But they weren't coming to see me. They came for Walter. They'd arrive at my door with expensive bottles of wine, expensive steaks for dinner, and spend hours laughing and talking with my new husband while treating me like hired help. "Mum, could you get us some more ice?" Kimberly would ask, without looking up from her animated conversation with Walter about real estate market trends. Jason would discuss business strategies with Walter for hours, never once asking about my day at the library or how I was feeling. It was as if I had become invisible in my own home. The dynamic was clear and painful. In their eyes, Walter was the successful, sophisticated man who was doing them a favor by taking care of their poor, helpless mother. I was just the burden he was kind enough to shoulder. They had no idea that every month I was the one quietly paying our bills, buying groceries, and giving Walter spending money for his endless social activities. The first real crack in my heart came during Christmas dinner. I had spent weeks saving from my library salary to buy modest but thoughtful gifts for Jason and Kimberly. For Jason, I found a leather-bound planner that I thought would help him organize his business ventures. For Kimberly, I bought a beautiful scarf that I knew would complement her favorite coat. When gift opening time came, I watched as my children unwrapped my presents with polite but underwhelmed smiles. Thanks, Mom, Jason said flatly, setting the planner aside without really looking at it. Kimberly held up the scarf for a brief moment before folding it back into its box. It's nice, she said, with about as much enthusiasm as someone commenting on the weather. Then Walter presented his gifts, expensive Swiss watches for both of them gleaming in their luxury boxes. The joy on my children's faces was radiant, genuine, overwhelming. They hugged Walter, thanked him profusely, and spent the rest of the evening admiring their new timepieces. What they didn't know was that I had given Walter the money for those watches, $3,000 from my monthly allowance, because he had convinced me that family gifts should come from both of us. The irony was crushing. I was funding their joy while being treated like an afterthought in my own living room. But that was just the beginning of my awakening. In January, Jason came to me in tears. His latest business venture, a tech startup he'd been bragging about for months, had failed spectacularly. He needed $50,000 urgently to pay off debts and avoid bankruptcy. Mum, I know you don't have much, but surely you have something saved. Dad would have helped me. When I told him I didn't have that kind of money, his demeanor changed completely. The tears dried up, replaced by cold anger. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're living like a pauper when Dad left you something. I know he did. You're just being selfish. Walter, overhearing from the next room, came in with his usual smooth smile. Jason, don't upset your mother. I'm sure we can figure something out. Later that evening, Walter gently suggested that perhaps I could take a small loan against the apartment, or cash in some old savings bonds. Just to help the boy out, he said. Frank would want you to help your son. I found myself writing Walter a check for $50,000 from the trust fund's monthly allowance I had been saving. Walter presented it to Jason as if it came from his own resources, his own connections, his own generosity. Jason's gratitude toward Walter was overwhelming. Thank you so much for taking care of Mum and helping our family, he said, shaking Walter's hand with tears in his eyes. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, who was basking in praise that should have been mine, I began to understand the true nature of the relationships forming around me. The pattern continued with Kimberly's wedding planning. She was engaged to a nice young man named David, and I was excited to help plan her special day. But when I offered to contribute to the planning, Kimberly brushed me off. Mum, you just don't understand our vision. This is going to be elegant and sophisticated. Instead, she included Walter in every decision. They spent hours together looking at venues, tasting cakes, and choosing flowers. When it came time to decide who would walk her down the aisle, Kimberly announced that she wanted Walter to do it. He's like the father figure I need now, she explained. You understand, don't you, Mum? I understood perfectly. I understood that my children had decided I was worthless, while the man I was financially supporting had become their hero. By spring, Walter's true nature began revealing itself in ways I could no longer ignore. I started noticing charges on our joint credit card that I didn't recognize. When I asked Walter about them, he became defensive. I'm handling some business opportunities, he said vaguely. You wouldn't understand the details. One afternoon, while Walter was out, I decided to investigate. What I found in his desk drawer made my blood run cold. Casino receipts, lots of them dating back months. Withdrawal slips from our checking account for amounts that made me dizzy. Walter hadn't been looking for work. He had been gambling away the money I gave him for household expenses. When I confronted him that evening, Walter's charming facade cracked for the first time. So what if I played a few games? He snarled. I've been stuck in this tiny apartment with nothing to do while you count every penny like some miser. A man needs some excitement in his life. But the gambling was worse than I thought. The next week, a large man in an expensive suit knocked on our door. When I answered, he asked for Walter in a tone that made my skin crawl. Tell him Tony sent me, the man said. About the 80 grand. $80,000. Walter owed $80,000 to people who didn't look like the type to accept payment plans. When I told Walter about the visitor, his face went white. "Don't worry," he said, but his voice was shaking. "I'll handle it." That night, he asked me for a loan. "Just until my luck turns around," he promised. Instead of offering help, I called Jason and Kimberly to tell them about Walter's gambling problem. I thought they would be concerned, that they would want to help figure out a solution to protect our family. Their response stunned me into silence. "Mum, are you sure you're not imagining things?" Kimberly asked. "Walter seems so responsible. Maybe you misunderstood what you saw." Jason was even worse. "You're always looking for problems," he said coldly. "Walter is the best thing that's happened to our family in years. Maybe if you stopped being so negative and paranoid, you'd see that." They refused to believe me. Worse, they seemed to think I was the problem. The next weekend, they organized what they called an intervention. Both of my children, along with Walter, sat me down in my own living room to tell me how my negativity and penny pinching was affecting everyone's happiness. "Mum, we think it would be better if Walter handled the household finances," Jason suggested. "You're clearly overwhelmed by the responsibility." Kimberly nodded in agreement. "Walter has business experience. He knows how to make money work better than you do." I looked at Walter, expecting him to defend me, to tell them that I was capable of managing my own affairs. Instead, he put on his most concerned expression and said, "I just want what's best for Myra. If taking some of the burden off her shoulders would help, I'm willing to do that." They were trying to take control of my finances to feed Walter's gambling addiction, and they genuinely believed they were helping me. That's when I realized the depth of their betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional. They had so little respect for me, so little regard for my intelligence and judgment, that they thought a gambling addict was more trustworthy than their own mother. The breaking point came on Mother's Day. I woke up expecting at least a phone call, maybe a card. Instead, I found a note from Walter saying he had gone golfing with friends. No breakfast in bed, no flowers, no acknowledgement that it was my special day. Around noon, I decided to drive to Jason's house to surprise him with homemade cookies. When I arrived, I saw Walter's car in the driveway alongside Jason's and Kimberly's. Through the window, I could see them all sitting around the dining table, with an elegant brunch spread, laughing and enjoying themselves. There was even an older woman I didn't recognize being treated like the guest of honor. I knocked on the door, and Jason answered with a look of annoyance. "Mum, what are you doing here?" "It's Mother's Day," I said quietly. "I thought I'd visit." "We're kind of in the middle of something," he said, glancing back nervously. "Maybe you could come back later." That's when I saw her clearly. The woman at the table was Martha Walter's ex-wife. My children were celebrating Mother's Day with Walter's ex-wife, while I stood on the doorstep like an unwanted solicitor. "Who is that woman?" I asked. "That's Martha," Kimberly called from inside. "Walter's been helping her through some tough times. We thought it would be nice to include her in our family celebration." Walter appeared behind Jason, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Myra, what are you doing here? I told you I was playing golf." "You lied to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We didn't think you'd understand," Walter said coldly. "Martha is like family to us. She's been part of important moments in my life." "And I'm your wife," I reminded him. "Well, maybe if you made more effort to fit in with the family dynamic," Kimberly said cruelly, "you'd be included in more things." I turned and walked back to my car while they watched from the doorway. Nobody followed me. Nobody apologized. Nobody wished me a happy Mother's Day. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment eating a sandwich for dinner, while my husband and children enjoyed their celebration without me. I realized that in their eyes I had become less important than Walter's ex-wife, less deserving of love and respect than a woman who wasn't even related to them. The next morning, I found Frank's personal items scattered on the living room floor. Walter was going through boxes I had stored in the closet. Frank's watch collection, his cufflinks, his vintage model cars that he had collected since childhood. "What are you doing with Frank's things?" I demanded. "Jason and Kimberly think we should sell some of this old stuff," Walter said casually. "We need money for household expenses, and this stuff is just collecting dust. Those are Frank's personal belongings. They're not for sale." Walter stood up, holding Frank's favorite watch, a vintage Rolex that Frank's father had given him. "Myra, be reasonable. Frank is dead. These things aren't bringing him back. We could get good money for some of this vintage stuff, especially the car collection in the garage. Jason knows a collector who'd pay top dollar." "You want to sell Frank's cars?" I asked, horrified. "Why not?" "You don't drive them. They're just taking up space and probably decreasing in value sitting there." That's when it hit me. Walter hadn't just researched Frank's belongings. He had researched their value. He had planned this. He had discussed it with my children. They had all agreed to sell my dead husband's possessions for cash, while I wasn't included in the conversation. The betrayal was complete. 2 weeks later, I discovered the true depth of their conspiracy. While cleaning Walter's desk, I found a folder hidden beneath some golf magazines. Inside were legal documents that made my heart stop beating. Petition for guardianship, power of attorney papers, medical evaluation request forms, all bearing Walter's signature and witness signatures from Jason and Kimberly. Walter was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I sat in my kitchen reading document after document, my hands shaking as the full scope of their plan became clear. They intended to prove that I was suffering from age-related cognitive decline, that I was unable to manage my own affairs, that I needed Walter to take legal control of my life and finances. The supporting documents were even worse. Jason had written a detailed affidavit describing my increasingly erratic behavior and poor financial decisions. Kimberly had signed a statement claiming I had become paranoid and suspicious and was no longer capable of living independently. They had documented every time I questioned Walter's spending, every concern I had raised about his gambling, every moment I had tried to protect our household finances. They had twisted my reasonable caution into evidence of mental incompetence. There were medical appointment cards for doctors I had never heard of, psychiatric evaluation schedules that had been made without my knowledge, a complete plan to strip me of my legal rights and hand everything over to Walter. But the most devastating discovery was at the bottom of the folder: a private investigator's report about Frank's assets and investments. Walter hadn't married me out of love or even convenience. He had researched me, investigated my late husband's financial situation, and targeted me specifically because he believed I had inherited significant wealth. The report was thorough and accurate. It listed Frank's real estate holdings, his investment accounts, and estimated his total net worth at the time of his death. Someone had done their homework very well, but Walter hadn't found the trust fund. The investigator had missed the carefully hidden structure that Robert Martinez had created to protect Frank's wealth. Walter thought I was worth a few million at most. He had no idea he was trying to steal $45 million. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Walter had married me and manipulated my children to get his hands on money that was actually 50 times larger than his wildest dreams. That afternoon, I found text message conversations on Walter's phone that had been left unlocked on the kitchen counter. The messages between Walter, Jason, and Kimberly painted a picture of calculated greed that took my breath away. Walter to Jason: "Once I get legal control, we split everything 3 ways like we discussed." Jason to Walter: Make sure Mum doesn't suspect anything. She's been asking too many questions about your spending. Kimberly to Walter. I found a lawyer who specializes in elder law. He says the incompetency process usually takes about 6 weeks if we have good documentation. Walter to Kimberly. Your affidavits are perfect. The medical evaluation is scheduled for next Tuesday. After that, it's just paperwork. Jason to Walter. I can't wait to pay off my debts and start fresh. Mum never appreciated how much potential Dad's investments had anyway. They were planning to rob me of my freedom, my dignity, and my financial security. They had convinced themselves that I was too stupid and too incompetent to deserve control of my own life. They saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and what they believed was my inheritance. The final text message exchange was the most revealing. Kimberly to Walter. Do you think Mum will be angry when she realizes what we're doing? Walter to Kimberly. She'll probably be relieved. Taking care of finances is a big responsibility for someone her age. We're actually doing her a favor. Jason to Walter. Besides, it's not like she'd know how to enjoy the money anyway. We'll make sure she's comfortable. They genuinely believed they were justified. In their minds, I was an elderly burden who couldn't be trusted with money. And they were the responsible adults who deserved to inherit Frank's legacy. I called Robert Martinez that evening. It's time, I told him. I want to reveal everything. Robert Martinez had been Frank's lawyer for over 20 years, and he had watched Walter's manipulation unfold with growing concern. I've been wondering when you'd call, he admitted. I've seen the legal documents Walter filed. He's moving fast. We met the next morning at Robert's office, and I brought copies of everything I had discovered. Robert examined the evidence with the careful eye of someone who had spent decades protecting families from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. This is elder abuse, he said grimly. Financial exploitation combined with emotional manipulation. Your children are accessories to attempted fraud. Robert explained the legal process we would follow. Since Walter had initiated incompetency proceedings, we would let him continue until the court hearing. At that hearing, Robert would present evidence of the conspiracy and reveal the true extent of my financial assets. The trust fund has grown considerably over the past 5 years, Robert informed me. Between market appreciation and compound interest, you're now worth $47.2 million. While Robert prepared our legal strategy, I spent the next week gathering additional evidence. I installed small security cameras in common areas of the apartment recording Walter's behavior when he thought I wasn't watching. I documented his gambling receipts, his lies about job searching, and his conversations with debt collectors who continued to call our house. Most importantly, I began recording my conversations with Jason and Kimberly. Using a small digital recorder Robert provided, I captured their condescending attitudes, their dismissive treatment of my concerns, and their open discussions about my supposed mental decline. During one particularly revealing conversation, Jason explained his theory about my condition to Kimberly while they thought I was napping. She's clearly developing dementia, he said confidently. Look at how paranoid she's become about Walter. She thinks he's gambling away their money, which is ridiculous, since they barely have any money to begin with. I know, Kimberly agreed. And she keeps talking about Dad's investments like there's some huge fortune hidden somewhere. It's sad, really. She's created this fantasy world where she's wealthy. Walter is being so patient with her, Jason continued. Most men his age wouldn't put up with her delusions and mood swings. We're lucky he's willing to take legal responsibility for her care. They were so convinced of their narrative that they never questioned whether my concerns about Walter might be legitimate. They had decided I was incompetent, and every piece of evidence that contradicted their conclusion was dismissed as further proof of my mental decline. Meanwhile, Walter grew increasingly confident about his approaching victory. He began spending money he didn't have buying expensive clothes and making reservations at upscale restaurants. He purchased a new luxury car, telling the dealer that his financial situation was about to improve dramatically. One evening, Walter took Jason and Kimberly out for what he called a celebration dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in the city. When I asked what they were celebrating, Walter smiled and said, "The future, sweetheart. We're celebrating the future." They returned home laughing and talking about vacation plans and investment strategies. They were already spending the money they expected to inherit, dividing up assets they believed would soon be under their control. On the Friday before the court hearing, Walter made his final preparations. He moved important documents to a safety deposit box, changed the passwords on our joint accounts, and set up automatic transfers that would take effect once he gained legal authority over my finances. That night, as Walter slept peacefully beside me, confident that his plan was about to succeed, I lay awake thinking about Frank. "I kept my promise," I whispered to his memory. "I protected myself first, and now I'm going to protect what you built." Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for justice. Walter dressed in his best suit, looking every inch the concerned husband about to take on the burden of caring for his incompetent wife. Jason and Kimberly arrived early, both wearing somber expressions appropriate for such a serious family matter. "Don't worry, Mom," Kimberly said, patting my hand condescendingly. "This is all just legal formality. Soon everything will be much easier for you." Walter had coached me on how to behave during the hearing. "Just try to stay calm," he said. "Don't get agitated or defensive. Let me do all the talking." We arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Walter, Jason, and Kimberly sat together in the front row, whispering confidently about the proceedings. I sat alone in the second row, playing the role of the confused elderly woman who needed protection from her own poor judgment. When our case was called, we moved to the smaller hearing room where Judge Patricia Williams presided over family court matters. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Walter's lawyer, David Chen, presented the petition with professional efficiency. He outlined Walter's concerns about my mental state, referenced the supporting affidavits from Jason and Kimberly, and recommended immediate appointment of Walter as my legal guardian. "Mrs. Myra has been exhibiting signs of paranoia and poor financial judgment," David Chen explained. "She has made unfounded accusations against her husband regarding gambling, despite his obvious devotion to her welfare. Her children are concerned that she may be developing early-stage dementia." Judge Williams reviewed the paperwork carefully, asking detailed questions about the medical evaluations and witness statements. Walter answered everything smoothly, presenting himself as the reluctant but responsible husband who simply wanted to protect his beloved wife from making decisions that could harm her future. "Your Honor," Walter said during his testimony, "I love Myra deeply. All I want is to ensure she receives the care and protection she deserves in her golden years. Managing finances and making complex decisions is becoming too stressful for her." Jason and Kimberly nodded sympathetically from the gallery, occasionally wiping away crocodile tears as Walter painted a picture of their poor, declining mother, who needed to be saved from herself. Judge Williams seemed to be leaning toward granting the petition when Robert Martinez entered the courtroom, carrying a thick briefcase and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver bombshell news. "Your Honor," Robert announced, "I represent Mrs. Myra in this matter, and I have significant evidence that this petition is based on fraud and constitutes attempted elder abuse." The change in the room was immediate and electric. Walter's confident smile froze on his face. Jason and Kimberly exchanged confused glances. David Chen shuffled through his papers nervously. "I object to this interruption," David Chen said quickly. Mr. Martinez was not listed as counsel for the respondent. Mrs. Myra retained my services yesterday, Robert replied smoothly. I am here with evidence that this court needs to see before making any decisions about my client's competency. Judge Williams looked intrigued. Mr. Martinez, what evidence are you referring to? Robert opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Your Honor, over the past month, Mrs. Myra has been systematically recording conversations and gathering evidence of a conspiracy to defraud her of her assets. I have audio recordings, financial documents, and security camera footage that prove this incompetency petition is nothing more than an elaborate scam. Walter's face had gone completely white. That's absurd, he stammered. Myra is confused. She doesn't understand what she's saying. Let's see about that, Robert said. He handed Judge Williams a set of transcripts while setting up a digital audio player. Your Honor, I'd like to play recorded conversations between the petitioner and the alleged victim's children discussing their plan to divide Mrs. Myra's assets once they gain legal control. The first recording began playing, and Walter's voice filled the courtroom. Once I get legal control, we split everything 3 ways like we discussed. Jason's response followed. Make sure Mum doesn't suspect anything. She's been asking too many questions about your spending. The colour drained from Jason and Kimberly's faces as their own voices betrayed them. More recordings followed each one, revealing another layer of their conspiracy. Their discussions about my supposed mental decline, their plans to sell Frank's possessions, their excitement about inheriting money they believed was rightfully theirs. Judge Williams listened to every recording with growing amazement and disgust. When the audio evidence concluded, Robert presented the financial documents showing Walter's gambling debts, his lies about employment, and his systematic manipulation of household finances. But, Your Honor, Robert said, the most important evidence is this. He withdrew a legal document that made everyone in the room lean forward. Mrs. Myra is the beneficiary of a trust fund established by her late husband Frank. The current value of this trust fund is $47.2 million. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Walter's mouth fell open. Jason and Kimberly stared at Robert as if he had just announced that I was secretly an alien from Mars. David Chen dropped his pen. 47 million, Judge Williams repeated, making sure she had heard correctly. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Myra has been living modestly by choice, taking only a small monthly allowance from the trust fund while observing how she was treated when people believed she was poor. The attempted guardianship petition appears to be motivated entirely by greed. Walter found his voice first, though it came out as a croak. That's impossible. Myra doesn't have any money. She works at the library. She drives an old car. Mr. Walter, Judge Williams said coldly, you seem remarkably well informed about Mrs. Myra's supposed financial limitations for someone who claims to be concerned about her welfare. Robert continued his presentation with devastating efficiency. He showed the court Walter's private investigator report, proving that Walter had targeted me specifically because he believed I had inherited wealth. He presented evidence of Walter's gambling debts and the threats from casino creditors. He displayed security camera footage showing Walter searching through my personal papers and documents when he thought I was asleep. Your Honor, Robert concluded, this is not a case of age-related incompetency. This is a case of financial elder abuse perpetrated by a predatory husband with the willing assistance of the victim's own children. Judge Williams turned her attention to me for the first time during the hearing. Mrs. Myra, do you understand what has been presented here today? I stood up, shedding the confused elderly woman persona I had been playing. Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. For 2 years, I have been emotionally and financially abused by people who were supposed to love and protect me. They treated me like I was worthless while planning to steal everything my husband worked his entire life to build. My voice grew stronger as I continued. They convinced themselves that I was incompetent because it was easier to believe that than to admit they were stealing from me. They wanted Frank's legacy for themselves, and they were willing to destroy my freedom and dignity to get it. Walter jumped to his feet. Myra, you don't understand what you're saying. We were trying to help you. I love you. You love my money, I replied calmly. You researched my husband's assets before you ever asked me on a date. You married me because you thought I was a wealthy widow who could be easily manipulated. Judge Williams had heard enough. I am immediately dismissing this guardianship petition. Furthermore, I am ordering a criminal investigation into attempted elder abuse and fraud. Mr. Walter, you are prohibited from having any contact with Mrs. Myra pending the outcome of this investigation. She turned to Jason and Kimberly, who were still sitting in stunned silence. As for you two, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Conspiring to rob your own mother is contemptible beyond words. As court officers escorted Walter out of the building, he shouted back at me, "You'll regret this, Myra. You can't live without me. You need me." But I felt nothing but relief as I watched him disappear through the courthouse doors. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe freely. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal transformation. Walter's arrest made local news, and the story of the elderly woman who secretly had $47 million while being abused by her family captured public imagination. I moved out of our small apartment and into a beautiful penthouse overlooking the city. For the first time in 5 years, I felt safe in my own home. No more walking on eggshells, no more hiding my true financial situation, no more pretending to be less than I was to accommodate other people's expectations. Walter's gambling debts caught up with him quickly once he lost the protection of my financial support. The casino creditors, who had been patient when they thought he was married to money, became significantly less understanding when they realized he was broke. Within a month, Walter had filed for bankruptcy and left town to escape the people he owed. Jason and Kimberly faced their own consequences. The investigation into the conspiracy revealed that Jason's failed business ventures had actually been successful money laundering operations designed to hide assets in preparation for their inheritance. When the truth came out, Jason lost his banking license and faced criminal charges for financial fraud. Kimberly's real estate career collapsed when her role in the conspiracy became public knowledge. Clients cancelled contracts, her brokerage fired her, and she found herself unable to find work anywhere in the industry. Her wedding to David was postponed indefinitely when he realized the extent of her involvement in the plot against me. Both of my children attempted to contact me through lawyers, claiming they had been misled by Walter and didn't understand what they were doing. They painted themselves as victims who had been manipulated by a master manipulator. They begged for forgiveness, for understanding, for one more chance to be the children I deserved. I listened to their messages through my attorney, but chose not to respond. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Some trust, too shattered for repair. They had shown me who they really were, when they thought I was powerless, and I believed them. The hardest part wasn't losing my husband or my children. The hardest part was accepting that I had never really had them in the first place. Walter had never loved me. Jason and Kimberly had never respected me. I had been living in a fantasy where family meant something to people who saw relationships only as transactions. But healing began almost immediately. Without the constant stress of emotional abuse and manipulation, I felt 20 years younger. I started sleeping through the night again. I rediscovered my appetite for life, for books, for conversation with people who valued my mind rather than my bank account. I began volunteering at a children's literacy program, reading to kids who reminded me why books had always been my sanctuary. These children didn't care about my money or my age. They cared about the stories I could tell and the worlds I could open for them. Through my volunteer work, I met other women who had survived similar experiences. Margaret, a 70-year-old widow, whose stepchildren had tried to convince her she had Alzheimer's so they could control her pharmaceutical company shares. Sandra, a 65-year-old divorcee, whose adult son had stolen her identity to fund his drug addiction. Patricia, a 68-year-old retired teacher, whose daughter had forged her signature on a reverse mortgage application. We formed an informal support group meeting for coffee every Tuesday to share our stories and celebrate our survival. These women understood what I had been through because they had lived it themselves. They knew the particular pain of being betrayed by people who were supposed to protect you. Frank's memory was finally honored the way it should have been. I established a scholarship fund in his name for first-generation college students studying business and finance. I kept his car collection and displayed his favorite pieces in a small automotive museum that welcomed visitors every weekend. His watch collection went to a horological society where young people could learn about the craftsmanship Frank had always admired. Most importantly, I used Frank's money for causes he would have supported. A literacy foundation that built libraries in underserved communities. A cancer research fund focused on the type of disease that had taken him from me. A program that provided financial planning education to widows and widowers who were navigating grief while trying to protect their assets. The money became a tool for good instead of a weapon for greed. 6 months after the court hearing, I received a letter from Jason. He was facing prison time for financial fraud and wanted to apologize one last time. His letter was carefully written, probably reviewed by lawyers, full of remorse, and promises to do better if I would just give him another chance. I read the letter once and then placed it in my fireplace. Some chapters of life need to be closed permanently, and forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. I had learned to love myself enough to stay away from people who had proven they would hurt me for their own benefit. A year later, I was featured in a magazine article about elder abuse prevention. The interviewer asked if I regretted keeping my wealth secret for so long. Not at all, I told her. That money revealed everyone's true character, including my own. It showed me who deserved my trust and who didn't. It taught me that real love doesn't count your bank account, and real family doesn't betray you when they think you're vulnerable. The interviewer then asked if I would ever trust another romantic partner. I'm not looking for one, I admitted. I've learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with people who see you as a resource to be exploited. But that wasn't entirely true. I had found love again, just not the kind I had expected. I loved my Tuesday coffee group women who celebrated my victories and supported me through difficult days. I loved the children I read to every week whose faces lit up when they saw me arrive with new books. I loved Robert Martinez, who had protected my interests with the devotion of a true friend. I loved my new life built on authenticity instead of pretense. Most of all, I had learned to love myself, not the version of myself that tried to please everyone, that made excuses for other people's bad behavior, that accepted crumbs of affection from people who should have offered banquets of love. I loved the woman who was smart enough to protect herself, strong enough to survive betrayal, and wise enough to build something better from the ashes of what she had lost. Money didn't change me. It revealed who I had always been underneath the layers of other people's expectations. It showed me that I was worth protecting, celebrating, worth the respect I had been denied for so many years. Frank's final words echoed in my mind every day. Use it wisely, protect yourself first. I had done both. I had used his legacy to create positive change in the world, while protecting myself from people who would have destroyed me for their own gain. As I sit here today in my beautiful home, filled with books and memories and possibilities, I know that Frank would be proud, not just of how I managed his money, but of how I managed to find myself again, after losing everything I thought mattered. The greatest inheritance Frank left me wasn't $47 million. It was the reminder that I deserved better than I was accepting and the resources to demand it. That inheritance changed everything. So I have to ask you, have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was using you? What would you do if you found out your family was conspiring against you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about overcoming betrayal and finding strength you didn't know you had. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're worth protecting too. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. Take care of yourselves out there.